Hey folks, do you need to change the motor assembly on your trolling motor on your bass boat? Well, I'm going to show you how I did mine. Stick around. Hey folks, welcome to the Getting It Done video series on chicken thigh fishing. Welcome aboard, it's good to have you. So today what we're going to do is replace the motor assembly and the tube on a Minn Kota Edge 45 trolling motor on my 2021 Tracker TXW Pro 175. Little bit of a story behind it because it goes into safety, and I made a mistake a few weeks ago and I crashed into a navigation can at night on a very large lake. And when I did something to my trolling motor. It didn't work right afterwards. So in addition to being an instructional video, hopefully on how to successfully replace the motor assembly on your trolling motor, it's also a little bit of a safety message. What happened was I was on a place that I wasn't super familiar with, and it was a large place, large enough to have navigation cans, and I was in a hurry because I was trying to beat a storm. There was a storm rolling in on me. I was hitting some good fish, and then I had to get out of there in a hurry. So I learned a little bit of a lesson there, and I won't do that again. And what happened was I hit it head on, and so my trolling motor took the brunt of the blow. Fortunately, there was no other damage to the boat and no damage to me, so that's very good. Trolling motor is replaceable. Afterwards, the next day, I was out in the boat and I was using the trolling motor, and I started to hear like a grinding. It just sounded like kind of a grinding noise when it was operating, and then not too long after that, stopped working completely. So I took it apart, and I'm going to show you what I found. So I removed my prop, which is as simple as removing the nut, the washer, and the shear pin inside. And once you have that off, you can see this faceplate here that's held to the body of the motor assembly with two bolts, and you can see the end of the armature coming out. So we'll remove those two bolts. And that allows you to remove the plate. And inside you have the armature. Now you'll see there's a bit of debris in there. In the housing of the motor assembly fits the armature assembly, which is held in by a magnet, which is kind of difficult to get out. So inside the housing fits the armature, and what you see attached to the armature there is a broken piece of the magnet. There's a magnet that goes all the way around the inside here, and these are the pieces of it. When I hit that can, I shattered this magnet, and the pieces got all messed up with the armature assembly there and basically burnt it out and seized it. Basically, I ruined this armature assembly by crashing into the can, the force of which shattered the magnet inside the motor assembly and sent a whole bunch of pieces and fragments of this magnet all over the place, basically grinding the motor up. So rather than fool around with getting all kinds of different smaller parts, I just bought a whole motor assembly. I'll show you what that looks like. So I bought the whole motor assembly, which you can get from Minn Kota. I want to say I paid about 130 bucks for it. Comes with the wiring. And so rather than try to figure out which parts exactly I ruined and then possibly miss them, I bought the whole assembled motor assembly, and we're going to replace that. So that is what today's video is on. This again is a Minn Kota Edge 45 foot-pound thrust bow mount pedal controlled trolling motor, and it's on a 2021 Tracker Pro Team 175 TXW. So it's a popular motor, a lot of people have them, so maybe this video will be a help to you if you have a similar instance going on with your motor. You can also see in here that the force of the blow also broke the brushes. They are not, there's a piece of it right there. So I guess a small price to pay. At least I didn't damage the boat itself, and like I said, I didn't get hurt. Very valuable lesson learned though. I mean, when you're in a hurry, you make mistakes. When you're in a hurry at night, you make twice as many mistakes. I won't make that mistake again, I'll tell you that. So what we're going to do is completely remove the trolling motor, and we're going to replace the motor assembly. And I also bought a new tube, okay? The tube that the wiring goes up through. And the reason I did that was because when they manufacture these trolling motors, this tube is threaded into the motor assembly. I'll show you the new one. It threads into the motor assembly, if you can see the threads there. And they use very strong Loctite sealant when they do that to prevent water from getting in that motor assembly, which is a good idea. And so in doing so, it makes it very difficult to get this off. Now you can heat it up with a blowtorch and you know, melt that adhesive that's in there, that sealant that's in there. But I didn't want to mess with that and ended up needing a tube anyway and not having it in case I damaged it in the process. So I bought a new tube. So we're going to put a new tube and a new motor assembly on this Minn Kota trolling motor, and hopefully we'll be good to go. I'm sure we'll run into some surprises on the way, but hey, that's how you learn. So we got to remove the motor from the mount here, and that's with this knob. Oh, and by the way, I already made sure it's unplugged. I have a plug right here, so I could just unplug it. If you don't have a plug readily available, you better disconnect your battery so you don't chop your fingers off by accident. Next, we're going to take the foot pedal out of the foot pedal tray, and the foot pedal is attached to the foot pedal tray by 3 screws. There's one there is one up front here, there's one on the corresponding corner up front, and the third one is right there. So I'm going to remove those 3 screws so I can remove the foot pedal from the foot pedal tray. Okay, so 3 screws, and the foot pedal assembly comes out of the foot pedal tray. Okay, so now what we're going to have to do is disassemble the head unit, because you can't really disassemble the rest of the motor until you disassemble the head unit. And as you saw on the new motor assembly, it comes with new wires that run all the way up through the tube and connect here. So what we're going to do is cut the existing wires, and then when we put the new motor assembly on, we'll make new connections. So in order to remove the head unit, you have to take the cap off, and the cap is secured by 6 nuts, 2, 4, 6 from underneath. So here is the cap with the directional indicator to the head unit. And again, that was 6 screws to remove that. I'm going to put that aside. Put the screws right inside there so I don't lose them. So this is what the inside of your head unit looks like. I suggest whenever you do something like this, if you're like me and you don't have a lot of experience doing it, take a few photographs so you can see the orientation of everything, so when it comes time to put it back together, you put it back together correctly. Because 9 times out of 10, when you take something like this apart, something's going to fall out and you're not going to know where it goes. That's what happens to me anyway. So I've cut the wires, and I'm just going to remove the harness that holds the wires in place so I can just move them out of my way. In case they get in the way, and I'll put the harness back on so I don't lose it. The wires go through a little plastic harness held in place by a Phillips head screw. Okay, so now we're going to remove the rest of the head unit from the large tube. There's 2 tubes. There's a large tube, and then there's the longer, skinnier tube, thinner tube that runs all the way up through it. So in order to remove the head unit from the tube, you have 3 screws that hold this in place. 1, 2, 3. You can now remove the head unit after you get those 3 screws out. So what I did was I pulled that off, and you're going to see here that the cable drum that goes on top of the pinion gear in the top of the tube popped off there. So I'm going to keep that oriented so I know how it goes back on with those cables. And this washer goes here. So now next we have to remove this collar, and this collar is held on with two Allen type screws. So now we got the collar off, and the 2 screws to go with that, and we'll put that aside. Now, in order to remove the pinion gear here, and there's a bearing in there, there are 2 set screws, 1 on each side, and you have to remove those 2 set screws. Turn that over. There's another set screw on the other side. And so that's what the pinion gear looks like inside the tube, and I just removed the set screws, 1 on either side, and I put the gear and the washer back on top of it so I keep them together. And then once you remove those set screws, the pinion gear comes out, and you can see where I cut the wires there. And so now that you have the pinion gear out, you can remove the large outer tube, and this will have a collar on it here with a bearing inside it, a ball bearing ring. and then you can remove the tube, and we're going to reuse that exterior tube. The new tube I bought is the inside tube, the long tube. And then down on the bottom near the housing, you'll see that there's another bearing ring. And you'll see that the bearings, the balls are falling out of that. So fortunately, when I ordered this, I ordered a new bearing ring. So I'm glad I ordered a new one, because they are falling out of that. I mean, you can put them back in, but it's all rusty, and I'm going to put a brand new one in there. So now we're left with this part, and this is what we're going to get rid of. Although I'll probably save the wiring. I'll cut the wiring down here, or I can just pull out this housing. There's two bolts that hold this housing, and pull the whole thing out, and that way in the future, if I should need this housing for any reason, I'll have that on hand. And there you have it. Now we're taking it apart. Now we're going to try and put her back together and see if it works. So I threaded the wires from the new motor assembly through the new tube out the other end, and now we're going to thread the tube into the motor assembly, and I'm going to use PL Marine Loctite. And I'm not going to skimp on it, because I want a good seal. Alright, so we now have the new tube threaded into the new motor assembly. And we have the new wires coming up from the motor assembly through the tube. Okay, so now that we have the new shaft attached to the new motor assembly, I've put the components back on the tube, the fiberglass tube, the inside tube, in the order that they're going to be assembled on. So you'll see here, first we put on the new bearing cone and the new bearing ring with the ball bearings facing up, and that is going to marry into the race on the bottom of the exterior tube. And what's going to hold that in place is the collar when we put the collar back on. So we got the bearing cone and the bearing ring. We got the exterior tube. Then we have the top race for the top bearing ring that has the ball bearings facing down, and that fits inside there, and that's going to go up into the head unit. And then on the top we have the pinion gear secured with the set screw. So I have the pinion gear in place, secured with the set screw, with the new wiring threaded all the way through, and that's going to enable us to put the head unit back on to the tube. So we're going to grab the head unit here, and we're going to have to thread the wiring through the hole, and it's also going to have to go through the cable drum So I'm going to try to keep that oriented correctly so the cables don't come off and I have to reinstall them. Oh, actually, I almost forgot. I have to put on the gear and the washer prior to that. So after the pinion gear, we're going to take the gear and the washer, thread the wiring through it, like so. And now we're going to take the wiring and we're going to thread it through the head unit and through the cable drum, this black component here that holds the cables for your foot control. And those aren't going to go through together, so I'm going to have to put them through separate. And there we go. So now that that's through, very important to get it through the cable drum, otherwise you're going to have to take it back off once you put it on. So now we're going to fit the exterior tube, and we're going to lock it into place up with the head unit. Now when I went and bought the new parts for the trolling motor, I went ahead and I got new screws. No sense in not putting new screws in. Okay, so now we have the head unit on. And what we're going to do is secure the bottom of the exterior tube by bringing up the bearing ring and the bearing cone, getting that in place. So now we're going to put the collar in place to marry the exterior tube to the interior tube, as well as to hold the bearing and the bearing cone in place. Now the collars, you'll see one hole is bigger than the other. So the bigger hole is where the screw goes in, so you have to make them opposite. So we got the bigger hole on this side and the smaller hole on this side, and then the bigger hole, and that's where the screws go in, the bigger side, on opposite sides. All right, so now that collar is in place and everything involving the tubes should be in place now. And so now we have to make sure we put together the head unit back properly. So we're going to slide the cable drum over the pinion gear if we have enough flexibility to do so. And I may just have enough. If not, there's a tension screw on the foot pedal that can release some of the tension on the cables that'll give you a little bit of play to be able to put this drum back on the pinion gear. So I'm going to loosen that up. So hopefully that gives me enough play. There we go. So I just had to loosen up the tension screw, and I'll show you where that is. On your foot pedal, right in there, you can see where my screwdriver is. There is a tension screw for the cables. And so that was a little bit difficult to slide that cable drum back onto the pinion gear because of the tension of the cables pulling on it. So I loosened the tension there to give it a little bit of play, and I was able to slide it up and on there. And so now what we're going to have to do is connect our wires. So I have to take the 4 old wires I cut and strip a 1/2 inch off them. So we'll go ahead and strip those wires. Okay, so now we're going to make our electrical connections, and the new wires on the new motor assembly have these female disconnects, and I don't have any male disconnects on hand to attach to the wires that I previously cut from the old ones. So what I'm going to do is cut these female disconnects off and use butt connectors. So I've got the butt connectors crimped on the existing wires. We'll go back through the wire harness and we'll make sure we go black to black and red to red. Now yellow to yellow and white to white. Now my smaller gauge ones here are heat shrink, so we'll shrink them up. So my larger gauge ones aren't heat shrink, so I'm going to do some extra protection on them and wrap them with electrical tape. I always do that anyway. So now we should be good to put the cap back on the head unit. Okay, we've got her back together, with the exception of the prop. So I believe I'm gonna mount it up on the motor mount, and we'll see what we got going on. All right, we got those electrical connections made, we got the cap back on, and we have the motor mounted back on the boat. We have the foot pedal mounted to the foot tray, which has been reinstalled. And we have her plugged in. And with a little luck, yes sir. Well folks, that was a little bit of a job, but we did it. So thanks for being with me. I hope this video was helpful to you in more ways than one. Number one, taking a look at your trolling motor and the components, and if you have to replace something like a motor assembly like I just did. But more importantly, about being safe, because the whole reason I had to change my motor assembly was because I crashed my damn boat. And the reason I crashed my boat was because I was in a hurry and I was tired. I had just gotten done a 3-day tournament, and I was going out at night on a place that I haven't been on many times, and I was in a hurry trying to beat a storm. When you're in a hurry, you make mistakes. When you're tired, you make mistakes. I made a mistake. I hit a navigation can, and it cost me some time and effort and money to replace my trolling motor. Fortunately for me, trolling motor parts are replaceable, and it wasn't more serious than that. So although I like to poke fun at my mistakes and share those things with you, I'm serious about this one, You know, I like to learn from other people's mistakes, whether it's doing a project or doing anything from YouTube. And so I hope that from my mistakes, you learned something. Hope this video was helpful to you. All right. Thanks for joining us. As always, thanks for being a part of Chicken Thigh Fishing. Hit that like button, hit the subscribe button. And until next time, stay fishing, my friends.